Here's a version with fewer changes while maintaining the integrity of the original story. They say the husband is always the last to know. In my case, that may or may not have been true. What I do know is that I found out. Not by chance, not from my friends, and not from my wife's enemies. No, I learned this firsthand. It was at breakfast after a stormy night. I was finishing my second cup of coffee when my wife, Laura, said, "Yesterday, my boss invited me to lunch. We ended up in a hotel room and spent most of the day there. I loved it, and will probably do it again." I was silent for a few seconds, trying to process what I'd just heard. Then I asked, "Why did you come near me last night? Do you enjoy giving me sloppy seconds?" "I didn't give you a single second that I wasn't careful," she replied. "I cleaned myself up pretty well when we finished." "And yet," I said, "you came to me just a few hours after you were with him. To me, that's seconds, careless or not." "I guess I just felt a little guilty," Laura admitted. "Oh, damn, I don't know what I was thinking. I just felt the need to make love to you. I guess I wanted to see if anything had changed. But nothing had changed. I still enjoy making love to you." "Making love?" I said bitterly. "You just told me you cheated with your boss, and you're going to do it again. Where's the love in that?" "It was a figure of speech, Sam. Anyway, I'm telling you so you have time to decide what you want to do in case you don't want me around anymore." "Why would I want you around if you can tell me this so casually?" I shot back. "I need to think about what I want to do, and you need to move into one of the other bedrooms." "That's not necessary, Sam. I just told you I still enjoy making love to you." "Maybe you do," I said, "but I have no idea what other women your boss is sleeping with. I want to make damn sure you don't pass something to me that he's given to you. I just hope it's not too late. For all I know, you could have given me something from him last night." Her face went pale at my words, and I could tell she hadn't considered that possibility. After a moment, she said, "He wouldn't do anything that would make him sick. He's careful, he has to be, because of his wife." I shook my head in disgust and left the table. When I got out of the shower, Laura was sitting on the bed. "When I told you," she began, "I was hoping you'd say we need to talk about this." "What is there to talk about?" I asked. "You cheated on me and casually threw it in my face. If you can be this calm about it, how do I know this was the first time? How do I know all those late nights at the office weren't just more lies? You said you spent hours in the hotel room with Greg, so how do I know you don't spend afternoons in hotel rooms a couple of times a week? How do I know Greg is the only one, Laura? There's nothing to talk about." "Well, that's not entirely true," she said. "We need to decide how to tell Erin and Matt. And of course, there's your family and mine. We'll have to let them all know. I don't want everyone to think it's my fault. They should know I'm not the one who ruined this marriage." "It doesn't have to be like that, Sam," she said, her voice softening. "I love you. And other than yesterday with Greg, I've never cheated on you. It just happened. It was spontaneous. I did it because I wanted to feel wild for once in my life, not just a mother and a housewife. It wasn't about Greg, he just happened to be there at the right time. Maybe not, Laura, but it sure as hell made my feelings for you less. And don't forget, you said you'd probably do it again. I'll be talking to a lawyer. Whatever happens next, you can consider our marriage over. I will never be able to trust you again." I tied a Windsor knot in my tie and left the room without another word. That day, I barely thought about work. Instead, I looked up a divorce lawyer near my office and made an appointment for the next day after lunch. As I wrote it in my calendar, the date struck me. It was a week before our 24th anniversary. Well, I thought grimly, this year I won't have to buy a card or a gift. After work, I went home because I didn't know where else to go. Going to a bar or calling a friend to vent didn't feel right. When I got home, Laura had dinner waiting, just like she always did. The table was set, and there was even a bottle of wine. I didn't know what she was hoping for, but whatever it was, she wasn't going to get it. Still, the food was there, and I was hungry. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat down at the table. Dinner was meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and salad. We ate mostly in silence. I ate in silence, trying to enjoy the meal despite the tension hanging in the air. Laura was clearly working up the courage to say something, and I hoped she wouldn't speak until I was finished. I wanted to leave the room on a full stomach if she decided to open her mouth. But that wasn't meant to happen. I was just about to take a forkful of salad when Laura said, "What if I told you this will never happen again? Would that change anything?" I wasn't the type to talk with my mouth full, so I continued chewing the salad without replying. She fidgeted in her seat, waiting, and then said, "It was a mistake, Mark. A huge mistake that I deeply regret. In 24 years of marriage, Mark, one bad thing has happened. Can't you bring yourself to forgive me for one bad thing in all those years? Is it really possible that what we shared for 24 years should be lost, thrown away, because of one stupid mistake?" By the time she finished, I had swallowed the bite of salad. I put down my fork and said, "It wasn't just one mistake, Laura. The first was letting another man be with you. And I don't even know if Eric was the first or if yesterday was the first time you were with him. The second mistake was telling me about it. If you'd kept your mouth shut, we wouldn't be sitting here under these circumstances. But your third mistake, your biggest mistake, was telling me that you liked it and might do it again. So, to answer your question, yes. What we've built over the last 24 years is ruined because of what you did. You've completely lost my trust, Laura. And a marriage cannot exist without trust, not a marriage I want to be in." She got up from the table, crying, and left the room. I took a sip of wine and finished my dinner. Afterward, I cleaned up the kitchen and went to my room to play on the computer for a while. Later, when I went upstairs to go to bed, I noticed that Laura had moved her things into Erin's old room. She probably picked that room because Erin had moved to California after getting married and hadn't used it in years. Our son Matt still came home occasionally, so his room wasn't an option. The next morning, I didn't see Laura before I left. I stopped for breakfast at the Village Inn, then headed to work. At 9 o'clock, once the workday started at Wallish & Teen, I called their office. When the secretary answered, I asked to speak with Eric Hayes. When he picked up and said, "Hello," I replied, "This is Mark Rivers. Eric, Laura told me about your afternoon romp at the hotel, and I decided to call to let you know I'm kicking her out. She's all yours now. Besides, since we're talking, you should know I'm pissed. You'll want to make sure your health insurance is up to date because you're going to need it." I hung up before he could say a word. I wasn't in a rush to find him. Let him spend his time looking over his shoulder, wondering if I was waiting in the shadows, ready to pounce. That afternoon, I got some bad news. In our state, there was no fault assigned in divorces. Everything would be divided equally. Since Laura and I made roughly the same amount of money, there likely wouldn't be any alimony. The kids were grown and independent, so child support wasn't a factor either. The only complication might be our pension funds, but since we each had one through work, the lawyer figured they would cancel each other out. It looked like this would be a straightforward divorce, if divorces could ever be straightforward. The lawyer brought up the possibility of suing Eric in an alienation of affection claim. He even suggested we might sue Wallish & Teen if they had policies against workplace relationships. But I rejected the idea. It didn't feel right to hold the company responsible for what Eric and Laura did. Besides, if we did that, they'd both probably lose their jobs. And if Eric couldn't pay damages, I'd likely end up owing Laura alimony. Instead, I told the lawyer to get the divorce papers ready and file the lawsuit against Eric alone. It was after 5 o'clock when I left the lawyer's office, so there was no point in going back to work. On the way home, I thought about the division of property. The house was nearly paid off, with just 3 years left on the mortgage. We had a lot of equity in it. But did I want to buy out Laura's share and keep it? Probably not. What would a single man do with a big, 4-bedroom house? Not only that, but every room in that house would remind me of the life we had before Laura cheated. It seemed I had 2 options: Laura could buy out my share, or we could put the house on the market and split the proceeds. When I got home, Laura had already prepared dinner. As I sat down, I could see that she wanted to say something but couldn't bring herself to speak. I finished eating and was getting up from the table when Laura said, "Eric told me you called him today and threatened him." "Not true," I replied. "I didn't threaten him. I made him a promise." "You'll only get yourself into trouble, Mark. You could end up in jail. Why should you care?" I shot back. "I wouldn't be around to interfere, and you could spend more time at the hotel with your favorite guy, provided, of course, I leave him something to play with." "Please don't do this, Mark," she said, her voice trembling. "Please, for me." I laughed bitterly. "For you? I'll tell you what I did for you today. I met with a lawyer and asked him to start filing the divorce papers. You can let your lover know he won't be able to hide behind your skirts anymore." "I wasn't thinking about him," she said quickly. "I don't want you to go to jail because of my stupidity." "I wouldn't mind," I said coldly. "I could sit in prison and smile, thinking about how you'd feel knowing you were the reason I was there. Imagine how fun it would be to tell Erin and Matt that you put their father in jail." "Don't even dare say that, Mark." "Why not? I already told you that I'm going to make sure everyone knows this marriage didn't fall apart because of me. Get ready, Laura. People are going to ask why you gave up on your marriage." I paused for a moment and continued, "Another thing, you should think about what you want to do with the house." "I don't want it." "So if you do, you'll have to buy out my share. Otherwise, we'll have to sell it." "Sell the house?" "Oh God, Mark, no. We can't do that." "Then figure out how to buy my share." I left her sitting in the kitchen and went into the living room to play on the computer. The next morning, I got up and left before Laura woke up. At work, I told my boss, Barney, about what was going on and mentioned I might need time off occasionally for lawyer meetings or court appearances. He wished me luck and said to take as much time as needed. When I got home that evening, Laura wasn't there. I warmed up some leftovers and settled in to watch TV. The phone rang, and I picked it up. It was my daughter, Erin. "Mom called me," she said. "She said you're leaving her. Is it true? Did she tell you why?" I asked. "She just said it was her fault." "What happened?" "Let's leave it at that," I said. "It was her fault. I intended to call you and Matt to explain because I didn't want anyone thinking it was all on me. But if she's already admitted it was her fault, that's enough. Is there any chance you two can work this out?" "None," I said firmly. "Why, Dad? You two were so deeply in love. The key word, sweetheart, is were." "How are you doing?" she asked, her voice full of concern. "I'm fine. Don't worry about me. I'd come home to help, but I'm tied up with a big project at work and can't get away." "It's okay, honey. There's nothing you can do. Don't worry about Matt, I'm sure Mom's already called him. I love you, Dad. Take care of yourself." "I love you too, Erin. We'll talk again soon." Just as I hung up, the phone rang again. This time, it was Matt. Our conversation was almost identical to the one I just had with Erin. Not long after, Laura came home. "Late evening with Eric?" I asked sarcastically. "No, Mark," she said, her tone weary. "For your information, I spent the evening visiting your parents and mine. I told them about the divorce and made it clear it was all my fault. I didn't go into details, I just told them it wasn't because of anything you did. Now, if you don't mind, I'm going to my room. I need to pass out. I saw tears streaming down her cheeks as she headed upstairs. A week ago, I might have rushed to comfort her. But now, I didn't move. The next morning at work, Barney called me into his office. "Are you okay? How's everything with the divorce?" he asked. "There's no chance this won't happen," I replied. "I was wondering," he said. "Your kids are grown, right? So there's not much keeping you here, aside from your parents and sister." "Why do you ask?" "Well, O'Brien is retiring, and we need someone to replace him in the Santa Monica office. How would you feel about moving to California? The job's yours if you want it." "Are you serious?" I asked. "There are plenty of people here with more experience who'd jump at this opportunity." "Experience isn't everything," he said. "I looked at everyone, and you're my choice. What do you say?" "I'll take it," I said without hesitation. "When do you need me there?" "O'Brien gave a month's notice starting yesterday. I'd like you to be there during his last week so he can bring you up to speed." "Understood. I'll start making arrangements." Back at my desk, I called my lawyer to ask how the move might affect the divorce. "It depends on whether she resists or not," he said. "If she resists, you might have to fly back and forth for meetings and court dates. If she doesn't, it should be straightforward." "How could she fight this?" I asked. I thought no-fault divorces eliminated that kind of thing. "Usually, yes. But if she claims the marriage can be saved with counseling, the court could side with her. It can't stop the divorce," the lawyer explained, "but it can delay it and make it more expensive. Sometimes, that's enough for the opposing party to give up on the case." "Well, I'm not going to stop it." "What are you going to do, serve both her and Eric?" "The documents are ready," he said. "All I need is your consent. Do it this afternoon if possible." "Consider it done," he replied. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the lawyer called to let me know the papers were delivered at 2:35. When I got home from work, Laura was sitting in the living room, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked up as I entered and said, "You did it. You really did it. I can't believe you're throwing away 24 wonderful years because of one mistake. You still don't get it, do you?" I replied, setting my bag down. "It wasn't just that you slept with Eric. It was how you threw it in my face, looked me straight in the eyes, and told me you loved it, and that you'd probably do it again. Understand this, Laura, I didn't throw away 24 good years. You did." She stared at me, her lip trembling. "You need to decide what you want to do with the house," I continued. "Because in 2 weeks, I won't be here." Without waiting for a response, I went to the kitchen, pulled some leftovers from the fridge and sat down to eat. After dinner, I went to my office and called Erin in California. "Hey, baby," I said after we exchanged greetings. "I don't know if this is good news or not, but I'm moving to California, Santa Monica, to be specific. It'll be in about 2 weeks. Just you, or you and Mom?" "Just me," I replied. "Today, I filed divorce papers." "I'm so sorry, Dad." "Don't be. I need you to do me a favor." "Anything, Dad." "I need you to look at apartments and condos near Santa Monica and find me a hotel or motel in the area where I can stay at first." "No way, Dad. You're staying with me." "There's no way I'm letting you stay in a motel. Won't that be an inconvenience for you and Alan?" "Not at all. Don't worry about Alan." "Okay. If you're sure." "I'm completely sure. I can't wait to see you." "Me too, baby. I'll call you as soon as everything's settled." The next morning, when I came downstairs, Laura was already up and sitting at the kitchen table. "Good morning," she said quietly. I said nothing, pouring myself a cup of coffee. I decided I don't need this house if I don't have you to share it with me, she said. I'll call the realtor this morning and get everything started. It doesn't have to be this way, Mark, she added, her voice trembling. Sorry, Laura, but it does, I replied, pouring the coffee into a travel mug and heading out the door. At work, I called a real estate agent and arranged to meet him at the house at 1 p.m. By 3 o'clock, the process was well underway. On my way home, I stopped at a U-Haul store and bought some boxes to start packing my things. When I got back, Laura wasn't home, but there was a note on the kitchen table saying she'd be staying with her sister for a few days. That evening, I spent my time packing and moving boxes into the garage. By bedtime, most of the house was done except for my office and the clothes I'd need over the next 2 weeks. The next day, my lawyer called. I heard from Eric, he said. He claims we're being stupid because we have no evidence. He says all we have is what your wife told you, and he's going to deny it. I hate to admit it, but he's right, I said. Do you want to drop the lawsuit? No. Don't stop the lawsuit. See if you can find anything useful. How? I don't know. Let me think about it. For the next 2 days, I focused on getting ready for the move. Laura was still at her sister's, so I called and asked her to come home so we could talk. I'll come, she said, but I'm not staying. She arrived at 7 p.m., and I made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table, and I told her about my move to the coast. I handed her the real estate agent's card and said she'd need to handle the sale. I promised to come back for the closing once the house was sold. I'll be staying with Erin until I find a place, I added. You can contact me there if you need anything. Then I asked her the big question. Why, Laura? Why did you cheat on me, and with Eric Hayes? I told you, Mark, it just happened. It was spontaneous. I don't understand, Laura. How could this just happen so suddenly? I don't want to talk about it, Mark. It was stupid, and it cost me you. You may not want to talk about it, but I need to know, I pressed. Was I such a bad husband that you could do this to me? Was I so bad in bed that you had to turn to someone else? It wasn't like that, Mark, she said, shaking her head. I can't explain how I felt at the time. Ted was supposed to just take me to lunch. Then he leaned in behind me, which surprised me since he'd never shown any interest in me before. He asked me if I'd ever cheated on you. I told him no and asked why he wanted to know. He said he'd always had a thing for me. Since we were eating at the hotel restaurant and there were rooms upstairs, he thought he'd try his luck. If I'd cheated before, I might have done it again. I think I surprised him when I asked him to pay the bill and get us a room. I know it doesn't make sense to you, Laura said, her voice low, but like I said, I wanted to be something other than just a wife and mother, at least once in my life. I wanted to do something exciting and wicked, and Ted reaching out to me gave me that chance. But why, exactly, with Eric? I asked, trying to understand. It just so happened that I was in the right place at the right time, and it was he who made the suggestion. And why did you tell me you liked it and that you'd probably do it again? Was Eric such a good lover? No, Laura admitted. It wasn't any better with him. I said I'd probably do it again because I wanted more excitement. Telling you about Ted and me was another stupid mistake on my part. I'm confused, Mark. On the one hand, it was the betrayal that made me so angry, but it was the guilt from the betrayal that made me confess. When I confessed, I thought we'd have a conversation like we're having now. I thought I could convince you that my night outside of our marriage wouldn't hurt us. I was sure you'd understand how much I love you and let me work through this wild, reckless feeling. I thought you'd see it wasn't about Ted's skill in bed. It was just the deception that made it feel exciting. I figured after a couple of times, I'd have dealt with it and moved on. Now I know I should have kept my mouth shut and let things with Ted fizzle out naturally. If I'd kept quiet, you'd never have known, and we'd still be together. Does this conversation mean you think I might change my mind? No way, Laura. I've already told you that. She looked down, and I continued, this whole conversation helped me calm down. Now I know that nothing I did, or didn't do, caused you to cheat on me. Knowing that will help me sleep better. Laura left the kitchen in tears. I stood up and turned off the tape recorder I had hidden on the table. The next morning, I made copies of the recording and dropped one off at my lawyer's office. I planned to give a copy to Eric Hayes eventually but decided to wait until after the lawsuit against him was resolved. The following week was busy. I trained my replacement, packed for the move, and prepared the house for showings. We already had 2 couples scheduled to come see it, which I hoped was a good sign. On my last Friday at work, the office threw me a farewell party at a lounge nearby. It was a great send-off. The next afternoon, I loaded up the U-Haul truck and started my drive to California. An hour out, I called Erin to get directions to her house. She must have been watching from the window because, as soon as I pulled up, she came running out the door to greet me. She gave me a big hug and helped me unhook the car from the trailer. We drove to the storage facility and unloaded the truck into a rented unit, then returned the truck and trailer to the U-Haul dealer. On your first night here, we'll go out to dinner, Erin said as we headed back to her house. Then I'll show you around. What time will Alan get home? I asked. Alan's not coming, Erin said matter-of-factly. I kicked him out when I caught him with the neighbor. Is there any chance you two will make things right? I asked. About the same chance as you and Mom patching things up, she said with a small smile. I raised an eyebrow. Don't look at me like that, Dad, she said. I know my dad, and I know what kind of man he is. There's only one thing that would make him leave. Mom actually called and admitted it was her fault. Besides, she added, the neighbor had a husband, and when he dealt with Alan, there wasn't much left of him. Why didn't you let us know? I asked. I was embarrassed, or maybe ashamed. You and Mom had more than 20 years together, and I couldn't even make it 3. That evening, we went out to dinner, and then Erin showed me around the area. We ended up at a place called the Blue Grotto, a lively spot with a great live band. Erin seemed to know everyone. Before we even sat down, several people, both men and women, came over to say hello. Erin introduced me to a few women and made it clear I was single. Why did you do that? I asked. Because if you're going to hang out with me, Dad, you can't be a wallflower, she said with a grin. I spend a lot of time on the dance floor, and I can't leave you sitting alone. Don't worry, the girls here are persistent. They'll come to you. I don't know, honey. This isn't really my scene. Maybe not, Erin said, but this is exactly what you need right now. Trust me, Dad, it'll bring some life back into you. Almost on cue, a pretty blonde approached our table. May I ask your dad to dance? She asked Erin with a smile. Erin laughed. See what I mean, Dad? For the rest of the evening, I danced with 5 different women. 2 of them gave me their numbers and asked me to call them. I had to admit, after what Laura had done to me, it was a huge boost to my ego. Laura had told me I wasn't to blame for her cheating, but deep down, I still had doubts. That night, for the first time in weeks, I felt like myself again. On the way back to Erin's house, I asked if she'd found any suitable apartments for me. She replied, I've found a few, but you won't need them because you're staying with me. I don't think this will work, honey, I said. Why not? I saw you dancing with some of those guys tonight. I wouldn't want to interfere with your love life. Don't be ridiculous, Daddy, she said with a laugh. Those guys have their own places. Yes, but what if I decide I want to, let's say, spread some of my pollen? We're adults. You have your own room. We can handle it, she replied confidently. The next week was hectic as I settled into my new job and met the team I'd be working with. Barney must have told Pat O'Brien something, and Pat spread the word. There were 3 single women in the office, and I noticed 2 of them seemed interested. Although they were both attractive, I wasn't about to mix work with my personal life. There was no way I was going to have an affair in the workplace. That Friday night, I went back to the Blue Grotto with Erin. I had to admit I was starting to enjoy the place. Anna, one of the women who'd given me her number, joined us at the table and asked why I hadn't called her. "I've been busy moving, getting used to my new job, and settling into the area," I explained. "Well, you're here now," she said with a grin. "We'll just pretend you called me and we agreed to meet tonight." Erin laughed. "You're on your own, Dad. If I were you, I'd just give in and enjoy it." Taking her advice, I spent a very pleasant evening with Anna. When the last bell rang, Erin handed me the car keys and said, "Don't wait up for me. It's Saturday tomorrow, and I don't have anything planned, so you probably won't see me until noon." As Erin left with one of the guys she'd been dancing with, Anna leaned over and said, "I think she's telling you that you won't be interrupted." I knew exactly what she meant, and a small war erupted in my mind. "You can't do this," I thought. "You're still a married man." "No, you're separated and going through a divorce," another voice countered. "You're as good as single." I hesitated, even though my own daughter had encouraged me to move on. And hadn't Laura, by breaking her vows, freed me from mine? In the end, Anna's confident smile and a quiet voice in my head tipped the scales in her favor. That night turned out to be one of the most liberating evenings I'd had in years. Over pancakes and bacon the next morning, Anna made it clear she wasn't looking for anything serious. "I don't have the temperament to live with just one person," she said. "I tried it, and it didn't work. But I can be a great friend with benefits." If last night was any indication, I replied, I'd say the benefits are worth it. "Can I apply for the waiting list?" She laughed. "You already interviewed for the position last night, and you got the job." I took her home and went back to Erin's house. When I walked in, she smiled and gave me a questioning look. I held up my thumb and forefinger in an "okay" sign. "Very?" she asked. "Very," I confirmed. For the next 2 months, Anna and I saw each other 2 or 3 times a week. Then, one Sunday morning, she broke the news, "This will be our last night. I got a promotion, and I have to move to Atlanta." Her departure was a bigger blow than I expected. I'd grown used to our arrangement and hoped it would last much longer. When I mentioned this to Erin, she said, "Don't worry, Dad. Anna already told all the girls how wonderful you are. If I had money, I'd bet you'll have a new girlfriend by the end of the week." She was right. The following Friday, we'd barely sat down at the Blue Grotto when women began approaching me to dance. One of them, a striking brunette named Melissa, or Mel, asked me to dance 4 times. The last song of the evening was Nights in White Satin. As we swayed to the music, Mel looked me in the eyes and said, "Do you want to be with me tonight?" Erin had left an hour earlier, saying she wouldn't be back until noon. "Yes," I told Mel. "I have to be home before 9 o'clock to take care of my mother," she said. When I asked, she explained that she still lived with her parents, and her mother was disabled and needed constant care. "Next Friday night?" she asked as we parted. "Absolutely," I replied. For the next 2 months, Mel became a regular part of my life. Because of her work schedule, we could only meet on Thursdays and Fridays, but we made the most of our time together. One Monday evening, as I left work, I noticed a man leaning against my car. "You're just in time," he said as I approached. "Do we know each other?" I asked, puzzled. "No, and you'll regret that we ever met," he growled. "What's this all about?" "I'm going to kick your ass," he said, stepping closer. I gave him a steady look. "Why would you want to try that?" "Because you slept with my wife." "Are you denying that you're sleeping with Mel?" the man asked, his voice rising. "Who the hell is Mel?" I replied, genuinely confused. If you're talking about Melissa, she's not married. Not married, he snapped. She's been married to me for 10 years. If that's true and she's married, I had no idea, I said calmly. She doesn't wear rings, and no one at the Blue Grotto ever mentioned she was married. But I'll tell you this, you kick her out, and I'll take her in. Why the hell would you do something so stupid, he yelled. If she cheats on me, she'll cheat on you too. Did you ask her why she's cheating on you? I countered. You need to figure out what's broken. All I know is that if I take her in, I'll sure as hell make sure not to give her a reason to cheat. But now that I know she's married, I'll stay away from her until you both work things out. He glared at me, his fists clenched, but I kept going. I have one question for you, though. How can she leave home every Friday and Saturday night and disappear without you noticing? I drive a truck, he said begrudgingly. I'm away from home from Thursday to Sunday. I braced myself for him to take a swing, but instead, he turned and walked away. The next week, I couldn't stop thinking about who might take Melissa's place. On Friday, I went back to the Blue Grotto. About half an hour after I arrived, Melissa walked in, spotted me, and came over. She sat down and said, I understand you met Roy. If Roy's your husband, then yes, I replied. Will this stop us from having fun? That depends on what happens, I said. I told him I'd stay away from you until he got rid of you. Has he kicked you out yet? No, and he won't, she said, her tone defiant. He loves me. Then we can't be together, I said firmly. Why not? She demanded. Because you're married, I said. If I had known that from the start, I'd never have started seeing you. I'd never knowingly do to another man what my wife and her lover did to me. I don't believe that, she said with a bitter laugh. I'm just giving you what Roy refuses to give me. I love that man, but I need more. You and I had a great thing going. Let's not stop. Sorry, Melissa, I said, standing my ground. But unless Roy tells me he's kicked you out, we're done. She stared at me for a moment, then stood up and moved to another table. 5 minutes later, a man was sitting with her. I danced with a few other women that night but didn't pursue anything further. About an hour before closing, Melissa's companion went to the restroom, and she came over to me. Last chance, she said, her eyes locked on mine. Sorry, Melissa, I replied. You know my position on this. Your loss, she said with a shrug, then returned to her table. When the man came back, they left together. That night changed a lot for me, except my relationship with Melissa. Around 4 o'clock in the morning, I was awakened by loud banging on the wall between my bedroom and Erin's. It took me half an hour to fall back asleep, and when I woke up, I decided it was time to find my own place. When I walked into the kitchen, Erin was making breakfast. As I poured myself a cup of coffee, she smiled and asked, "Did you sleep well?" I decided she didn't need to know she'd woken me up, so I said, like a rock. It was Saturday, and I spent the entire day looking for an apartment. By evening, I'd found one I liked and completed the paperwork. When I returned to Erin's, she said, "Mom called. You need to call her." For what? She says there's a buyer for the house. What? She said she'd send you the details, but you need to call her, Daddy. Avoiding her won't solve anything. I hadn't spoken to Laura since moving to California, and I wasn't sure I wanted to hear her voice. Staying away from her helped me move on, or so I thought. The truth was, I still loved her, despite everything. I even thought about her when I was with Anna or Melissa. No, I muttered under my breath. I really don't want to hear her voice. But Erin had other ideas. She handed me the phone and said, "Call her." I should have refused. I should have left the room. But I didn't. Instead, I dialed the old home number. After 4 rings, Laura answered. Hello. Hello, Laura, I said. Erin said you called and wanted to talk to me. How are you, Mark? I'm fine, Laura. What did you want to talk about? I miss you, Mark. I don't know why, but before I could stop myself, I replied, I miss you too, Laura. Oh my God, Mark, she said, her voice trembling. Are you serious? What did you say about the house? I asked, steering the conversation back on track. After a brief silence, she said, we have a buyer. They're finalizing the financing, and the closing is scheduled for the 12th at 2 p.m. Can you come? I don't know, I said. That's only 6 days away. I'll have to see if I can make it work. I'll call you back. I hope you can be here, she said softly. We'll see, Laura. I'll call you tomorrow. When I hung up, I wondered why I hadn't just told her to handle everything through her father or brother. Erin noticed my expression and asked, What's wrong, Dad? What are you thinking about? I shrugged and said, I'm trying to decide if I should go back or just send her the power of attorney. Why don't you want to go back? Because the sound of your mother's voice gets under my skin, I admitted. If I feel like this just talking to her, how will I handle seeing her in person? When are you going to start being honest with yourself, Dad? Erin asked, crossing her arms. What do you mean? I saw the look on your face when you were talking to Mom, Erin said softly. Do you miss her? I didn't answer immediately, unsure of how to respond. I have no idea what happened between you two, other than that it caused you a lot of pain. But not being with her is taking its toll on you, Dad. I never meant to tell you this, but Mom calls a couple of times a week to ask how you're doing. She's unhappy, Dad. She misses you, madly. It's been a few months now, Dad, she continued. Maybe you're well enough to meet her. You need to go back, Daddy. It won't kill you. I sighed, deciding to change the subject. Since we're talking about what I need to do, you should know that I'm looking for my own place. Why? Erin asked, frowning. Well, this arrangement works for the most part, but it's time for both of us to have some space. I saw sudden understanding cross her face. She blushed furiously, muttered something about checking on dinner, and hurriedly left the room. After a silent dinner, Erin asked, Are you going to the grotto tonight? No, I said. I think I'll sit in front of the TV for a while. The ladies will be disappointed. I know a couple of them who are just itching to take your place, Melissa. Her words made me laugh. Your logic makes no sense, little girl. On the one hand, you're telling me to go home and be with your mom, and on the other hand, you're trying to set me up with your friends at the grotto. That's not what I said, she protested. I don't even know if it's possible for you and Mom to make peace. I just meant you need to come to some kind of agreement. Well, I'm staying home tonight. I need to pack my things. I found a place to live, and I'm just waiting for the credit check to go through. On Monday, I got the call at work, I was approved for the apartment. That same evening, I started moving in. It was a modest 2-bedroom apartment. My plan was to turn the second bedroom into a home office. Erin insisted on coming with me. While I carried boxes in, she critiqued everything. I have the perfect curtains for this room, she said, pointing to the living room windows. And ugh, the carpet is a terrible color. You should ask them to replace it. She helped me set up the kitchen and then went home, leaving me to spend my first night in the new place. The next day was spent unpacking and organizing. By evening, I faced a decision: should I return to sign the closing documents in person or fax over a power of attorney? After much deliberation, I picked up the phone and called Laura. Hello. It's me, I said. I've decided to come back for the closing instead of sending a power of attorney. Where will the closing take place? In the conference room of the First Bank on Shepherd Street at 2 p.m. I'll prepare the spare bedroom for you, she offered. I don't think that's a good idea, I said. I'll stay at a hotel just down the street from the bank. Don't be ridiculous, Mark, she said firmly. There's no need to spend money on a hotel when we still have a 4-bedroom home. I'll think about it, I replied. See you at the bank. Bye. The flight back gave me a lot of time to think. My last conversation with Melissa echoed in my head, along with Laura's admission months ago. Both women had sought excitement outside their relationships. Was it really about me, or was it about their own restlessness? Laura had said her reason for cheating wasn't that I was bad in bed but that she wanted to do something wild and reckless. Had that been the truth, or was it just to spare my feelings? When I arrived at the bank, Laura was already in the conference room. She smiled when she saw me, stood, and walked toward me. Quickly, I stepped behind the table, putting space between us. My smile faded slightly as I noticed she had dressed deliberately to catch my attention, wearing my favorite dress, her best heels, and styling her hair the way I used to like it. Before she could speak, others entered the room, and the meeting began. By the end, I had a check in my pocket for $873.62. There were 36 cents included, but who counted that? As we walked out of the conference room, Laura asked, "Will you stay? You don't have to leave before 5 o'clock." "No," I replied. "I have a few things to take care of, and I'll try to catch a late flight back to the coast." Disappointment crossed her face. "Will you ever forgive me, Mark?" "I don't know, Laura," I said honestly. "You hurt me deeply. Maybe the pain will fade with time, but I just don't know." "I hope you'll find it in your heart to forgive me," she said softly. "I have to go. Goodbye, Laura." She stood there, watching me leave. Every step away from her was harder than the last. A voice in my head taunted me, "Calm down, Mark. She slept with someone else and admitted it was a mistake. You're still married to her, but you've slept with Anna and Melissa. One justifies the other. You want her. You know you want her." It was hard to silence that voice, but I forced myself to. By 5 o'clock, I was parked down the block from Eric Hayes's office. I watched as he left the building and got into his car. I thought about what my lawyer had told me about the lawsuit. Eric had refused to settle, claiming that if we pursued it and he lost, he'd simply declare bankruptcy to avoid paying. As I followed him in my car, my thoughts churned. Would confronting him make anything better? Or was I just giving in to my anger? I followed Eric Hayes to a bar and parked behind him. As he walked toward his car, I intercepted him, blocking his path. "Hello, Eric. Long time no see," I said with a smile. Before he could respond, I punched him squarely in the face, then walked back to my car and drove away without looking back. From there, I drove to 1384, Meadowbrook Lane. When Janet, Eric's wife, answered the door, I handed her a copy of the recording of my conversation with Laura. "I don't want to ruin your day, Janet," I said softly, "but you need to hear what's on this tape." "I'm sorry, you don't deserve this." Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked away. 2 hours later, I was back home. The next morning, I called my lawyer and told him to withdraw the lawsuit against Eric. "After hearing what he told you," I said, "I decided to give his wife a copy of the tape and let her handle it." "A wise decision," he replied. "The courts have been lenient with these types of claims recently. It's unlikely we would have won anyway. By the way, the final hearing for your divorce is set for next Friday. You don't need to attend. 60 days later, you'll be officially divorced." For some reason, that news didn't bring the relief I expected. I deposited the check from the house sale into my bank account and made a mental note to start looking for a more permanent home in about 4 months. My current apartment lease was for 6 months, so I had some time to figure things out. The week flew by, and on Friday night, I went to the Blue Grotto. I danced with several women but didn't feel like flirting with any of them. Knowing Melissa had been married made me regret ever seeing her. I left early, around 10 o'clock. The next night, I returned to the grotto. About 20 minutes after I sat down, Erin arrived and joined me. Soon, her friends showed up, and we had to push a couple of tables together to fit everyone. One thing that always struck me about the grotto was how confident the women were. Most of them knew what they wanted and weren't shy about going after it. By 11 o'clock, I had danced with 3 different women, including Ruby. As the band played a slow number, Ruby leaned in close and said, "Anna once told me I'd be a fool not to take my shot if I got the chance. So, Frank, do I have a chance?" "I'd be a fool to say no," I replied. "Is there any reason we can't leave right now?" she asked with a sly smile. "None that I can think of," I said. "Yours or mine?" "Mine," I said. "I feel more comfortable there, at least at first." Ruby and I spent the next 2 months meeting 2 or 3 times a week. We both knew our relationship was temporary, but that didn't make it any less enjoyable. One night, Ruby broke the news. "Tonight's our last night, lover," she said. "I'm getting too attached to you, and that wasn't supposed to happen." I was disappointed but understood. I'd grown comfortable with Ruby and had hoped things would last longer. While I was with Ruby, things between Melissa and Roy heated up. Roy lashed out at one of Melissa's boyfriends, landing himself in jail for malicious assault. Melissa refused to post his bail and filed for divorce while he was still locked up. 2 weeks after Ruby ended things, Melissa called me. "You said you wouldn't see me until Roy and I were done," she said. "Well, we're done. Can you see me on Friday?" "Are you sure?" I asked. "What about the other guys you were dating?" "They don't meet my standards," she said confidently. "Yes or no?" How could I refuse? "Do you want me to pick you up at 7 o'clock?" I asked. "And be prepared, we might not even leave my house." On Monday, my lawyer called with news: the divorce was finalized. "I've sent the documents to you. They should arrive by Thursday," he said. "Are you going to celebrate?" "Not yet," I replied. "Maybe by the end of the month." When I hung up, I realized I had nothing to celebrate. All I felt was a profound sense of loss. The next 2 months were a blur of work, apartment hunting, and Roy's sentencing. He was convicted of malicious assault and sentenced to 9 months in the county correctional facility. Meanwhile, Melissa started talking about what we'd do when her divorce was finalized. It was clear she hoped I'd put a ring on her finger. I didn't say anything, but I knew it wouldn't happen. Melissa had openly cheated on Roy with more than one man. I couldn't see myself marrying someone like her. One Saturday night, Melissa and I were at the grotto, dancing, when I saw the door open. Erin walked in, with Laura. To say Laura looked stunning would be a massive understatement. She had clearly dressed to turn heads, and it worked. I must have tensed up because Melissa noticed and asked, "Is something wrong?" "No," I lied. "I just felt a sudden chill." We finished our dance and returned to our table. By the time the band announced a break, Erin and Laura were already sitting with the group at our table, directly across from me. I saw Erin introducing Laura to the others at the table, and I guessed she introduced her as my ex-wife because I noticed a few quick glances in my direction. Mel and I walked back to the table, and Laura's face lit up with a wide smile, only for it to vanish as she realized the woman walking beside me wasn't just passing by but was actually with me. Mel and I sat down, and Laura greeted me. "Hello, Frank. How are you doing?" "I'm doing well, Laura." "It's been a while," I replied. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your friend?" she asked. "Certainly," I said, my voice calm. "Mel, this is Laura." "Laura, this is Melissa, though she prefers to be called Mel." Mel gave a playful laugh and added, "Oh, well done, Frank. Maybe we can meet and exchange stories." Laura's expression hardened, and I could tell that hell would freeze over before she entertained that idea. The usual chatter resumed at the table, but Laura studiously avoided looking in Mel's direction. When the band started its next set, I grabbed Erin's hand and pulled her onto the dance floor. "What the hell is going on here, Erin?" I hissed. "What do you mean?" she asked, feigning innocence. "You brought Mom here, didn't you? She called and asked if she could live with me now that you have your own place," Erin admitted. "I wasn't going to say no to my mom. Don't you think I should have been warned before you brought her here?" "Maybe," Erin said with a shrug. "But she wanted to surprise you." "Well, she succeeded." "Damn it, Erin. How could you do this to me?" "It wasn't hard, Dad. I love both of my parents, and it's obvious to me that you two still love each other. Don't bother denying it. I saw the way your face lit up when you saw her walk in. And God knows I've heard enough from her over the past few months to know being away from you is killing her. If there's anything I can do to get you two back together, I'll do it. Bringing her here tonight was just step one. You're interfering, Erin." "I know," she said with a mischievous grin. "But like I said, I love you both, and I want you to be together again. This little girlfriend of yours doesn't stand a chance." "We'll see," I muttered. When the number ended, we returned to the table just as another song began. A man approached Laura and asked her to dance. I watched as they hit the dance floor and stayed out there for 3 songs. Halfway through the third, I felt a sharp poke in my ribs. Turning, I saw Mel glaring at me. "You should be here with me, not staring at your ex-wife," she said. "What are you talking about?" I asked, though I already knew. "You haven't taken your eyes off her since she got on the dance floor. And judging by the look on your face, you want to rip that guy's hands off her." I didn't reply. She was right. I wanted nothing more than to march out there and tell the guy to get his hands off my wife. My wife. Where had that come from? Laura wasn't my wife anymore. "Call me when you figure out what you really want," Mel said, standing up. "But right now, it's obvious your heart isn't here with me." She walked away, leaving me stunned. As I sat there, I saw the man dancing with Laura cross a line. A sudden surge of rage consumed me. Before I realized what I was doing, I was on the dance floor, grabbing him by the shoulders and pulling him away from Laura. "Get your hands off my wife," I growled. The man looked like he wanted to fight, but one look at my face changed his mind. He turned and walked away without a word. "Are you forgetting something, Frank?" Laura said, her expression puzzled. "I seem to remember we're not married anymore." "Maybe I moved the borders," I muttered. "Maybe you wanted this," she said quietly. "You wanted this," I shot back. "Did I?" she asked, her voice soft but insistent. I grabbed her hand and started to pull her toward the door. "Frank, stop it," she protested. "Damn it, Frank, let me go. My purse is on the table." "Erin will take care of it," I said gruffly. "Get in the car." "Yes, Frank," she said, almost meekly. The next morning, I woke to find Laura sitting up in bed, watching me. "Why, Frank?" she asked. "Why what? What happened last night? You couldn't wait to get rid of me, but last night you were jealous. It was written all over your face. Anyone who was paying attention could see it. That look screamed, 'This is my woman.' I didn't know what to say." "I don't know, Laura," I admitted. "It just happened." "Well, I'm glad it did," she said. "It's just a pity it didn't happen earlier." She got out of bed and asked, "Where's everything? I'll make us some breakfast." "There's nothing here. I haven't been grocery shopping yet this week." "Then we'll go to the village," she said. "But you'd better call Erin first. She might be worried." "I don't think so," I said with a small smile. "I think last night was exactly what she was hoping for when she brought you to the grotto. Then you should call her, Laura replied. Not me. Who should I call? I asked, already knowing the answer. The young lady you were with last night, she said. Why? I hope it's to tell her you won't be seeing her again. She turned to me, her voice soft but firm. I wish there were more nights like last night, Frank. Maybe another 20 or 30 years worth. I lay there, staring at her. Suddenly, I realized I wanted that too.